right, well today I present to you sermon number 12 in my series on the last day of the last days, which brings us, nearly to the end. We've got sermon 13 and 14 after this, and that's it. So on that note, by the way, one of those is the Q&A message, so be sure if you have questions to be sending those to me so that I can include them in that sermon. Nonetheless, today, Sermon 12. And we'll just keep going what we've been doing. As a reminder, last time I gave you 5 pieces of advice for reading Revelation. I want to restate those because today's sermon will be dealing with interpreting an aspect of the book of Revelation. So I want to repeat the advice I gave you from last time. And there are 5 pieces of advice. First, read the book of Revelation like a first century Christian would. In other words, like any other part of the New Testament, try to read the book as though you were a first century Christian and apply it through that lens. Secondly, read the book of Revelation according to its stated purpose. You might consider this an aspect of context. Does the book itself say what its purpose is? If so, read it accordingly. And the book of Revelation does state its purpose, and I'll review that purpose with you in the course of this sermon. Number 3, read the book of Revelation as a commentary on Scripture and ancient history, because you interpret Scripture by Scripture, and then also the lives of people, where they live and when they live matter. And that stuff shows up in the rest of the New Testament, and so it might as well show up here too. So you might as well read the book of Revelation in light of those things happening in the greater world around these Christians who are reading this book for the first time, and also take into account the other scripture that they believe. Fourth, read the book of Revelation as consistently symbolic. And I argued for this over and against the idea that you should interpret the book of Revelation literally unless the literal meaning is absurd. I said I thought that was absurd, and I argued instead that you should be consistently symbolic in your interpretation of the book of Revelation. And then finally, read the book of Revelation with an open mind toward more options. And last time I spent some time talking about the 4 classical views on the book of Revelation and how to interpret it. So preterism, futurism, idealism, and then also historicism. And I said once you comprehend all 4 of those and you're willing to consider all of them, it allows you to read the book of Revelation with a greater sense of perspective and more insight overall. So I very much advise you to keep those in mind. Now with those 5 pieces of advice in mind, we can get into what I want to talk about today, which is perhaps a central question of the book of Revelation. And that question is, who is the beast in the book of Revelation? This is a question which, if answered, brings a whole lot of the rest of the book in line with a particular interpretation, whatever that may be. So answering the question, who is the beast, is a pretty significant question. So let's go ahead and read the primary passage regarding the beast in the book of Revelation. Revelation 13, verses 1 through 10. And the dragon, that's Satan, stood on the sand of the seashore. Then I saw a beast coming up from the sea, having 10 horns and 7 heads, and on his horns were 10 diadems, and on his heads were blasphemous names. And the beast which I saw was like a leopard, and his feet were like those of a bear, and his mouth was like the mouth of a lion. And the dragon gave him his power and his throne and great authority. I saw one of his heads as if it had been slain, and his fatal wound was healed, and the whole earth was amazed and followed after the beast. And they worshipped the dragon because he gave his authority to the beast, and they worshipped the beast, saying, who is like the beast, and who is able to wage war with him? There was given to him a mouth speaking arrogant words and blasphemies, and authority to act for 42 months was given to him. And he opened up his mouth in blasphemies against God, to blaspheme his name and his tabernacle, that is, those who dwell in heaven. It was given to him to make war with the saints and to overcome them, and authority over every tribe and people and tongue and nation was given to him. And all who dwell on the earth will worship him, everyone whose name has not been written from the foundation of the world in the book of life of the Lamb, who has been slain. If anyone has an ear, let him hear. If anyone is destined for captivity, to captivity he goes. If anyone kills with the sword he must be killed. Here is the perseverance and the faith of the saints. Although the beast is not mentioned until halfway through the book of Revelation, he becomes a main character in that book from that point onward. It is impossible to frame any kind of understanding of the book of Revelation without coming to an understanding of the identity of the beast. He is that integral to the last half of the book, and therefore to all the book in a lot of ways. So the beast and his identity is very important for understanding the book of Revelation. Also, if the beast is a factor for the end times, then that is something we need to discuss in this series. This series is about the last day of the last days. What is going to happen at around the time Jesus is going to return? Is the beast a part of that? If the answer to that question is yes, then we certainly need to know. But if the answer to that question is no, we also need to know that so we don't accidentally include him in these things and have a wrong conception about things that might be happening at around the time Jesus will return on the last day. So, with that in mind, my sermon today is called Heads, Hills, and Horns. Or rather, Hills, Heads, and Horns. Honestly, I don't think it matters. HHH. It's alliteration, and it all fits what's happening with the beast, so just pick one, pick an order. Hills, Heads, and Horns. We'll make that the official one. I want to talk about the beast by moving through 5 headings today, kind of tackling a detail or an aspect of the beast at a time. So first I want to argue that the beast was a Roman emperor, and that tells you pretty quickly what's coming up in this particular sermon. I want to argue that the beast was a Roman emperor. Secondly, I will show you how the beast is portrayed very much like a particular emperor, Emperor Nero. For Christians of my persuasion who hold my particular kinds of views about the book of Revelation, Nero is usually pretty important. So yeah, I'm going that direction. But then third, I want to take the conversation in a slightly different direction and talk about some Roman times mass hysteria centered on the person of Nero, and which seems relevant for talking about the beast. And if that seems like a mouthful and kind of nebulous and you're not sure what to make of that, there's no other way to summarize it at this point. When we get there, you'll see just how weird it is. But I want to talk about it because it would have been a factor for people reading this book originally. Fourth, I want to talk about the other Roman emperor, very often discussed when talking about the book of Revelation, and that is a later emperor named Domitian. I think he is very important for understanding who the beast is, and very important in terms of connecting him with Nero. And then finally, I want to return to some details about the beast, specifically the mark of the beast, worshiping the image of the beast, and then the 10 horns. That's the horns in my sermon title, Hills, Heads, and Horns. They're important too. Well, as I go through each of those headings, I will make reference to the advice I gave you last time in my previous sermon regarding how to read the book of Revelation, so that you will have examples of how I apply those things to a specific issue or passage of the book of Revelation. Because I don't want to just tell you things without exemplifying them. I want to show you how those things actually play out. And I hope by the end of this sermon, you will not only have a firm and clear answer for the identity of the beast, but you'll also have a better idea of what it takes to interpret the book of Revelation and how you should go about doing that. So I'm not just, feeding you for a day here. I'm hopefully feeding you for the rest of your life in teaching you how to read this particular book of the Bible. So that brings us to heading number 1. We're going to lay the foundation for everything else I plan to say today by observing that the beast is described like a Roman emperor. So very much putting it here at the very beginning, the beast is a Roman emperor. All right? There's little way to get around that. For the most part, modern Christians believe that the beast is indeed an end times figure, which would mean that we have not yet seen the beast. The way most Christians talk about the book of Revelation, they fully expect the beast to be someone coming along later. So not anyone in the past, but someone in the yet future time. Now, believing the beast to be a yet future figure is part of the overall belief that the book of Revelation is interested in future events. This is the point of view which I called futurism last time, one of the 4 classical ways of reading the book of Revelation, which is important to consider, as I mentioned last time, but a way of reading the book of Revelation which I myself have largely just rejected. I used to be a futurist. I am now not a futurist. So I'm going very much backwards from that in that regard. And of course, part of that, as I mentioned last time, we need to remember the stated purpose for the book of Revelation. This is, one of my pieces of advice to interpret the book of Revelation according to its stated purpose. And we see that in chapter 1, verse 19, where Jesus tells John what to do. He says, "Therefore, write the things which you have seen, and the things which are, and the things which will take place after these things." So, from that, we see that Jesus is instructing John not just to write about future things, but to write about things that he has seen and things that things which are. So, not just the future, but past and present as well. Those are very much within the purview of the book of Revelation. So we have to bear in mind that he's not just looking at the future, not even the future from his perspective, but the past from his perspective, the present from his perspective. Those things matter too. With all that in mind, let's therefore see the evidence that the beast was a Roman emperor, which would very much be within the purview of Revelation's stated purpose. In order to help us, we need to read another passage about the beast. So the passage in chapter 13 is certainly the passage that most people think of when they think of the beast, but there's another passage which provides a lot of stuff, a lot of detail that is going to help us understand who the beast is. Now, the details are going to be overwhelming. I'm reading all of chapter 17, and there's a lot there. My advice to you right now, don't over-focus on any particular detail, trying to figure out what it means. Just focus on the overall attitude and scope of this passage about the beast, and let it kind of enter your mind in that way. So here we go, Revelation 17. "Then one of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls came and spoke with me, saying, 'Come here, I will show you the judgment of the great harlot, who sits on many waters, with whom the kings of the earth committed acts of immorality, and those who dwell on the earth were made drunk with the wine of her immorality.' And he carried me away in the spirit into a wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast, full of blasphemous names, having 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman was clothed in purple and scarlet, and adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls, having in her hand a gold cup full of abominations and of the unclean things of her immorality. And on her forehead a name was written, a mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and of the abominations of the earth. And I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints, and with the blood of the witnesses of Jesus. And when I saw her, I wondered greatly. And the angel said to me, 'Why do you wonder? I will tell you the mystery of the woman and of the beast that carries her, which has the 7 heads and the 10 horns. The beast that you saw was, and is not, and is about to come up out of the abyss and go to destruction. And those who dwell on the earth, whose names have not been written in the book of the life from the foundation of the world, will wonder when they see the beast, that he was, and is not, and will come. Here is the mind which has wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sits, and they are 7 kings. 5 have fallen, 1 is, the other has not yet come, and when he comes he must remain for a little while. The beast, which was and is not, is himself also an 8th, and is one of the 7, and he goes to destruction. The 10 horns which you saw are 10 kings, which have not yet received a kingdom, but they will receive authority as kings with the beast for 1 hour. These have one purpose, and they give their power and authority to the beast. These will wage war against the Lamb, and the Lamb will overcome them, because he is Lord of lords and King of kings. And those who are with him are called and chosen and faithful. And he said to me, the waters which you saw where the harlot sits are peoples and multitudes, and nations, and tongues. And the 10 horns which you saw, and the beast, these will hate the harlot, and will make her desolate and naked, and will eat her flesh, and burn her up with fire. For God has put it in their hearts to execute his purpose by having a common purpose, and by giving their kingdom to the beast until the word of God will be fulfilled. The woman whom you saw is the great city, which reigns over the kings of the earth. Based on the 2 passages we've read about the beast, there are 2 details which flag the beast as a Roman emperor. So for 2 reasons, we can believe that John was trying to identify the beast as a Roman emperor. First and foremost, the beast has worldwide dominion. He rules over the earth. Now the beast has power, a throne, and great authority over a multitude from every tribe, people, language, and nation. Now, for a first century author, writing to first century readers, you are immediately thinking of the Roman emperor. You say, well, it didn't rule the entire world. Well, people back then spoke that way. For them, the world was the Roman world. Paul talks like that in chapter 1 of Colossians, where he says the gospel and word of Christians have gone forth to the whole world, when it's just like the Roman Empire. Well, that's how they talked back then. It was the known world, the Roman Empire. So, and the beast has authority over all of that, which immediately flags him in the mind of any first century reader as a Roman emperor. And also the woman, the harlot, is the great city that has dominion over all the kings of the earth. Rome, obviously Rome. Any first century reader would have thought of it that way. You'll remember from Revelation 13, the beast has parts of him that look like a lion, a bear, and a leopard. Those are taken from the various other kingdoms of the world from the book of Daniel. As Daniel sees his visions of various animals that represent the succession of kingdoms, all of those become incorporated into the beast because the Roman Empire had dominion over all of that. So there's another clue for you. All these things, the worldwide dominion of the beast flags him as a Roman emperor. But here's the other detail. The 7 mountains, or 7 hills, depending on your translation, and different translations will say different things. It doesn't matter. Mountain, hill, in this case it doesn't matter. In the book of Revelation, the beast upholds a woman who represents Babylon the Great, and the woman sits on 7 hills, and those 7 hills are linked to the 7 heads of the beast. So we have this very complicated image in which some things are doing double duty, but this beast, he has these 7 heads, they represent 7 hills, and the woman, who represents a city, sits on the 7 hills. Now this is important because the city of Rome was built on 7 hills, and it was well known as the city of 7 hills. This was historical language. Rome was the city of 7 hills. That's how people identified it. For them it was important. In fact, those hills of the city of Rome are so important, they all had names. And just to make the point, I'm going to read off those names to you. Those names are Palatine, Aventine, Capitoline, Caelian, Esquiline, Viminal, and Carinal. Those are the names of the 7 hills of the city of Rome, and the city of Rome was built on those hills. This clearly flags the woman, the harlot, the city that she represents. This clearly flags her as the city of Rome, built on 7 hills. And as for why she's called Babylon the Great, that's just because Rome was the new Babylon. In the same way that the city of Babylon had this great empire that ruled over the kings of the world, Rome was the power ruling over the kings of the world at that time. Therefore, she is the new Babylon. She is Babylon the Great. All that to say, the language used by John to describe the beast would have immediately brought to mind the Roman emperor and the city of Rome, which means we're looking at something from the 1st century here. And it's not difficult to argue that. If you go looking for it, you find the evidence. It's right there. Now in my second heading, I want to show you how the beast is portrayed very much like a particular Roman emperor, and that is Emperor Nero. So we're not just arguing that the beast is, some Roman emperor. There is a strong connection to a particular emperor, and that is Nero. If we read Revelation as a commentary on Scripture, but also as a commentary on the history of the period, as I advised, we are steered in this direction. So applying one of my rules about reading the book of Revelation as a commentary on ancient history even, meaning history to these people in this time. If we follow that piece of advice, it leads us to the conclusion that the beast is being portrayed like Emperor Nero. And I have 3 reasons for saying that. So here we go. First and foremost, the beast is portrayed as persecuting Christians. One of the defining features of the beast is that he misuses his authority to persecute the saints. Now, although Christians endured some form of persecution from the very time of Jesus himself, that persecution was sporadic and it was local. So it was entirely done by a group of local leaders who said, hey, for this reason, let's persecute these Christians. And they would do that for a while and then it would stop. So sporadic local persecution was the general rule for the entire first century of church history. However, starting in roughly the year 64, Emperor Nero began the first organized and deliberate effort of persecuting Christians that came from the top down. This was the first time that someone high up in the Roman Empire, the emperor, decided, you know what, let's do a top-down persecution. Let's be deliberate about this. Let's be organized about this. This was the first time it happened. The apostles Peter and Paul were both martyred during that time, as well as many other Christians. You know, the famous story is of Nero dipping Christians in oil and lighting them on fire to serve as lights for his garden parties. We're dealing with that kind of thing at this particular time. Now, Nero's stated reason for this persecution was the Great Fire of Rome. This was a terrible incident in which like 70% of the city of Rome was burned down in this wildfire that spread through the city. Nero told everybody that Christians started the fire, and that was his basis for beginning to persecute the Christians. In reality, it was Nero who started the fire because he wanted to make some room for his building projects, and the fire got out of hand. And he just didn't want to take the blame, so he blamed it on us. That's what really happened. Nonetheless, Nero blamed the Christians and therefore used that as a justification to persecute us to the death. Nonetheless, as the first emperor to persecute Christians with violence, persecute the saints for 42 months, no less, and Nero very much becomes a top contender for the beast. He very much becomes the first Roman emperor who fills that role. By the way, those 42 months are also important. That's about 3.5 years. When Nero started persecuting Christians in the year 64, he only had about that much time left in his reign. So that time frame kind of fits. It's rounded for sure, but all the numbers in Revelation are these nice, neat, rounded numbers. So, you know, that's par for the course with John. But it's very, very close, and close enough to be like, I wonder if that's important. But anyway, the persecution from Emperor Nero is the first sign that he is the beast. Secondly, the beast has a fatal wound on one of his heads. He specifically says in the book of Revelation that the beast has a fatal wound on one of his heads. Revelation 13:3. I saw one of his heads as if it had been slain, and his fatal wound was healed. And the whole earth was amazed and followed after the beast. So not just wounded, but fatally wounded. And we also read later on, just for good measure, we read later when John describes the second beast, who is the false prophet working for the beast. We have another description. This is verse 14 of chapter 13. And he, the second beast, deceives those who dwell on the earth because of the signs which it was given to him to perform in the presence of the beast, telling those who dwell on the earth to make an image to the beast who had the wound of the sword and has come to life. So he was wounded with a sword, but he came to life. So, what does that mean? So the beast has a fatal wound made by a sword on one of his heads. Okay? Nero died by stabbing himself in the throat. He committed suicide by sword like that. So, beast with a fatally wounded head, Nero stabbed himself through the throat, seems kind of close. Both the beast and Nero have a fatal stab wound to the head, basically. So that's a very telling detail right there. But thirdly and finally, Another reason to view the beast as having some connection to Emperor Nero, the number of his name, the number of the name of the beast. And of course, this is the famous passage on the mark of the beast, starting in chapter 13, verses 17 and 18. And he provides that no one will be able to buy or sell except the one who has the mark, either the name of the beast or the number of his name. Here is wisdom. Let him who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for the number is that of a man, and his number is 666. Now, these comments about the number of the name of the beast seem to come out of nowhere. Just like, what? In a book of weird symbolism and weird numerology, this is like the number of a man, number of his name, 666. John, what is going on here? It just seems to come out of nowhere. But there is a method here. There is a method to the madness, as there always is. Alphabets usually have numbers associated with them. It's just kind of it's a common feature of language. We kind of do that. In our alphabet, we usually associate A with the number 1, B with the number 2, and so on through the alphabet. We just do that. Why do we do that? I don't know. We do that. Now, Hebrew, however, the holy language of the Jews, so to speak, works very differently. Mainly in that in Hebrew, they don't have numerals. They don't have a single symbol for the number 1. They don't have a single symbol for the number 2. They don't have a single symbol for the number 3. They don't have any of that. They have to use their alphabet to represent numerals. They have to do that. And as such, they have a more complicated system that allows them to do that. Each letter of the Hebrew alphabet has a number associated with it. Some of them are single digits, some of them are the tens, some of them are the hundreds. But using their system, which is called gematria, by the way, using their system, they're able to represent pretty much any number they would really need overall. And so they have this whole system worked out to the point, and this is very interesting, and Hebrew scribes and Hebrew rabbis of this time very much use this in interpretation in ways that are kind of weird, but they used it. But that means every single name in Hebrew has a numerical value. The very fact that you have a name written in Hebrew letters means that name has a numerical value. And rabbis would like to use that. They would say, oh, the numerical equivalent of Abraham's name is this, and that signifies this. So they would very much take the number of people's names and derive value from that, derive meaning from that. And even so, it seems like John is kind of doing that. So, what if we work with the name Nero Caesar? What if we work with that name? Now, most Jews living in the Western Roman Empire, Eastern Roman Empire, the Eastern Roman Empire, would have encountered that name in Greek, because Greek was the primary language spoken all throughout the Eastern Roman Empire. And Nero's name would be written Neron Caesar in Greek. Now, if you write that name in the Hebrew alphabet, which therefore invokes the Hebrew gematria system, or gematria, I think I mispronounced it earlier, it invokes the Hebrew letter system into a number system. What is the number of the name of Neron Caesar? What is that number? Well, you add it all up, 666. Neron Caesar, the number of his name is 666, using the Hebrew numerological system. So that's pretty big. All that to say, the beast is portrayed very much like the Emperor Nero. There is a strong connection to Nero here. And we see that 3 ways. The 3.5 years of persecution, we see it in the fatal stab wound at the head, and also we see it in the number of his name, 666. Now, despite that argument being received as compelling by many Christians, and it is, there are a lot of Christians who would just stop right there and say, okay, there you go. The beast is Nero. End of discussion. Not quite. We have more to do. I need to take this conversation in another direction. So here's a swerve. So just take the stuff I've been saying and put a pin in that. We'll come back to it later. In my third heading for today, I want to talk about some Roman times mass hysteria. Some mass hysteria that was afflicting the Romans in the last half of the 1st century. And it's all centered on the person of Nero. So we're still kind of talking about Nero, but now we're getting weird. And not like Book of Revelation weird. I mean like people are weird. We're getting that weird. So before I get too far ahead of everything, let's back up and note an objection to identifying Nero as the beast, because I'm sure some people by this point in the conversation would be objecting. The problem is the beast does not simply have a wounded head, but a fatally wounded head, as I pointed out earlier, right? You know, his wound was a fatal wound. He was slain with the sword. The passages in Revelation 17 especially, the beast was and is not, but will come out of the abyss. So he was alive. He's not alive now, but he's going to come alive again, like a resurrection. I mean, this language, like this man died, but came back from the dead. And Nero didn't do that. The Emperor Nero didn't rise from the dead. Or did he? So to address this, I want you to remember two things before we jump into this oddity here I'm talking about. The book of Revelation thrives on symbolism. I made a big point out of this last time. The book of Revelation thrives on symbolism. We need to entertain the possibility of a non-literal meaning for this fatal wound resurrection stuff. That is quite within the realm of possibility of talking about a seven-headed monster taking over the world. Okay, we're very much in the realm of symbolism here. That is possible. Secondly, John might be referring to a strange particular notion believed by some Roman people in the last half of the first century. There was an idea circulating throughout those times and in that place that John might have in mind. So let's talk about that. In short, the people of the Roman Empire widely believed that Nero was either not dead or that he would come back to life. So yes, the Roman people of that time, a lot of them believed that Nero was either not dead or that he would come back to life. Historians usually call this the Nero redivivus myth. Redivivus is just the Latin word for revival or living again. So this is the revived Nero myth, the Nero redivivus myth. Strange as it is to say, several Roman historians, so historians who were Roman from this time, their own historians, noted that a lot of people believed that Nero was either not dead or that he would come back to life. This is something that they actually thought about. Specifically, they believed that Nero was living in the nation of Parthia to the east of the Roman Empire, and that he would return someday to reclaim control of the empire, leading an army of Parthians against Rome. So he was going to go, he was out there, he was going to schmooze the people of Parthia and convince them to support him in retaking his throne, and that he was actually going to do it. This is the Nero redivivus myth, Nero revived, coming again. So pervasive was this belief that 3 different men from the year 69 to the year 88, 3 different men, 20 years even after Nero died, 3 different men all tried to claim they were Nero and staged revolutions, trying to overthrow the emperor and take over as Emperor Nero. So you want to start a revolt in the Roman Empire, just stand on a street corner and say, "I'm Nero." And half the people will say, "Yay!" and they'll join you. I mean, it happened 3 times in the last half of the first century. It's amazing. How did all that happen? What goes into that? Well, you got to remember something. Nero was a very divisive figure in Roman politics. He was, in a lot of ways, and I mean this in all honesty, he was the Donald Trump of his day. The effect that Donald Trump has on Americans now is the effect Nero had on Roman people back then. There were people who hailed him as the savior of Rome. There were people who said he was delusional and dangerous. And like anxieties and desires and passions were high on both sides. So very similar to stuff we see today. So all that to say, half the empire urgently wished for him to be alive, and the other half was terrified that he might be. That's how you get this whole Nero redivivus thing, just high energy passion on overdrive. Even when Nero is dead, you know, people are saying, like, what if he's not dead? Or what if he comes back? It's that kind of thing. It's that kind of mass hysteria, as I called it earlier. And the next thing you know, you have the Roman version of the zombie apocalypse. because you have Nero coming back from the dead to take over the world again. So, the book of Revelation. I do not believe for a moment that John thought Nero would return from the dead and take over the world. I don't think John thought that at all. But I think John knew about the Roman Nero redivivus myth, and that he said, hey, that's a great idea. And that he used that as a symbol in his book to convey an idea, as he does with all of his symbols throughout the book. I think he's using that as part of the symbolism in his book for the beast. The beast is portrayed not simply as Nero, but Nero revived. Nero come back from the dead. Speaking of which, remember that detail about Nero leading an army of Parthians from the east? Well, that too finds its way into the book of Revelation. Revelation 16, verses 12 through 14. The sixth angel poured out his bowl on the great river, the Euphrates, to the east, and its water was dried up so that the way would be prepared for the kings from the east. And I saw coming out of the mouth of the dragon, out of the mouth of the beast, and out of the mouth of the false prophet, 3 unclean spirits like frogs. For they are spirits of demons, performing signs, which will go out to the kings of the whole world to gather them together for the war of the great day of God, the Almighty. So even kings invading from the east shows up in this book. There's Nero rounding them up, and the river being dried up so they can easily cross and invade the Roman world. There it is. That's part of the Nero redivivus myth. So therefore, in identifying the beast, we cannot just look at Nero. It's not enough to just say, well, the beast is Nero. We need to look for someone whom John might call a revived Nero. That's who we're looking for as we look for someone who can be this beast from the book of Revelation. Now, as we consider someone who might fill the role of a revived Nero, we come to my 4th heading for today. And this is maybe the most pedantic one, the most tedious one, but I also feel like this is where you really start to understand how John writes in the book of Revelation. I think this is where it all comes together. I want to talk about the other Roman emperor, very often discussed when talking about the book of Revelation, and that is a later emperor named Domitian. Came later on in the 1st century. In my opinion, the true fulfillment of the beast is Emperor Domitian portrayed as a revived Nero. That is my opinion on the beast. And I want to make that argument in 2 points, a tiny point and a big point. The tiny point, just to say first and foremost, Domitian was a lot like Nero. Of all the emperors that came after Nero in the 1st century, Domitian is the one that's most like Nero. Domitian was the only other emperor in the 1st century of the church to organize the persecution of Christians. No other emperors did that. Only Nero and Domitian had organized persecutions of Christians in the 1st century of the church. Also, Domitian suffered accusations of mental illness, kind of like Nero. So people that didn't like him said, oh, that guy is crazy. All that to say, Domitian is kind of like Nero, and therefore could be symbolically portrayed as a revived Nero, as Nero come again, in fulfillment of the Nero redivivus myth, as used by John in the book of Revelation. But here's the big point. Number 2, Domitian fits the succession of 7 kings stated by John in Revelation chapter 17. So all these weird details that John starts giving you in Revelation 17, Domitian fits into this nicely. Revelation 17, let's read verses 9 through 11 again. Here is the mind which has wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sits, and they are 7 kings. 5 have fallen. 1 is. The other has not yet come, and when he comes he must remain for a little while. The beast, which was and is not, is himself also an 8th, and is one of the 7, and he goes to destruction. According to John, if you have a mind with wisdom, you should be able to understand this passage with reference to the 7 kings leading up to the beast, who is the 8th king, and somehow also one of the 7. And at this point you're like, John, why are you writing like this, and what does this mean? What is this confusing, garbled nonsense you're throwing at us? Well, to the mind with wisdom, it actually makes sense. And if you think about it long enough, it does start to make sense. So with that in mind, let me give you the list of the first 8 Roman emperors, the first 8 kings, so to speak. They didn't call themselves kings, but the first 8 emperors. Augustus, Tiberius, Caligula, Claudius, Nero, Vespasian, Titus, and Domitian. Those are the first 8 Roman emperors. Now, to be fair, listing the Roman emperors is easier said than done. It's not as easy as looking at a list. Even among the historians who lived back then, actual Roman historians, they had disagreements over who qualified as an emperor of Rome. So it's not as easy as just listing off names. The list that I just gave you is the most conservative list because it means every person on that list was an undisputed emperor. Every single person would say, yeah, that guy's an emperor, that guy's an emperor, that guy's an emperor. So there's no disputes about those men being emperors. That said, some people would add more names, which probably don't belong on the list. Some, for example, would begin the list with Julius Caesar, right? The namesake of the Roman emperors, Caesar. However, Caesar never claimed to be an emperor and was, in fact, in his mind, just trying to preserve a dying republic. Now, he did that by becoming dictator for life, which, politics, right? He did that by becoming dictator for life, but in his mind, he was a staunch Republican. He was doing it for the people. He wanted to stabilize a very unstable situation. He never claimed the title of emperor. The first emperor by title was Augustus. Also, there's this year, the year 69, referred to as the year of the 4 emperors, which is exactly what it sounds like. This was a year of just complete anarchy in the Roman Empire when the imperial office was degraded to a game of king of the hill. A guy would claim it by violence, and he'd hold on to it for a few months. Then some other guy would come up the hill and throw him down, and he'd become emperor. And that happened several times in that one year, until one guy finally got the imperial title and was able to hold on to it. And that was Vespasian. So the question arises, do we count those first 3 emperors as emperors in the year of the 4 emperors? A lot of people say no. I say no, because it was a time of anarchy. Really, we should give it to the guy that was able to hang on to it. So I'm not counting them. Again, the list I gave you, the 8 that I gave you, that's the most conservative, reliable listing of who was an emperor of Rome. But I just want to fully disclose, yeah, there are difficulties with the list. Nonetheless, when you take that list of 8 emperors and bring it to the book of Revelation, it starts to make a whole lot of sense. So, 5 kings had fallen by John's time. That takes us through Nero. Nero was number 5, right? So, Augustus, Tiberius, Caligula, Claudius, Nero. First 5 had fallen. Okay, there we go. John says that one king still is. That would be Vespasian, the winner of the free-for-all in the year of 4 emperors. Okay, so he's the king that still is. Then John says that king number 7 will only reign a short time. Well, king number 7, emperor number 7, is Titus, who reigned 2 years, which is pretty short for an emperor. So far, so good. And then comes the beast, whom John says is an 8th king, but also one of the 7. Well, the 8th emperor is Domitian, who also counts as one of the 7 because he is so much like Nero. He's like a repeat of Nero. He's like a revived Nero. When you lay it all out like that, this makes so much sense of these garbled details that John starts giving you. You lay it out against the list of the Roman emperors and think about their relationship to one another. Boom, you have your beast. The true fulfillment of the beast is Emperor Domitian, who was very much like Nero, and who seems to fit the idea of the beast being king number 8, but also one of the 7, as a symbolically revived Nero. It's the Nero Redivivus myth fulfilled in an actual emperor who came along later. And if you are aware of and open-minded to the 4 classical views of the book of Revelation, as you should be, this is preterism, or preterism. This is the idea that most of these things find their fulfillment in first century events. And this certainly is one of them. The beast is looking a lot like Emperor Domitian as a revived Nero. symbolically revived. There are no true zombie apocalypses in Scripture, unless you count people coming back from the dead when Jesus rose from the dead in Matthew, which is really, really weird, but it's there. Anyway, Book of Revelation. Here at the end of this sermon, this is point number 5, I want to return to some other details about the beast, specifically the mark of the beast, worshiping the image of the beast, and the 10 kings. Those are all details that show up in various descriptions of the beast, so I want to talk about them. As we go through these, I want to remind you of rule number 1 for interpreting the book of Revelation, which is that we should read the book of Revelation as a first century Christian would. So get your head out of 21st century headlines and get your head in first century Roman and Christian history, because that's where we're going with all this. So let's look at all these details based on a view that the beast is a first century Roman emperor, probably the Emperor Domitian, viewed as a revived Nero. So let's start with the mark of the beast, the big one, the mark of the beast. In talking about the mark of the beast, people tend to focus on the mark, as in the physical mark that is applied to people. What is it going to be? You know, in normal parlance, looking at the futurist interpretation of the book of Revelation, is it going to be a tattoo? Is it going to be a national ID card? Is it going to be a microchip implanted into your head or your hand? What's it going to be? This is missing the point. Let's not forget again, we're dealing with a highly symbolic book. The mark is just as likely to be symbolic as anything else. In the same way that the 144,000 are sealed for God, the worshippers of the beast are marked as his worshippers. I mean, it's the same kind of thing. Even when reading about the woman, the great harlot, it says she has a name on her forehead. Well, the fulfillment of these things is not looking for some woman walking around with a tattoo on her forehead. I mean, that's symbolic. It's a mark. It's a name on her forehead because this is who she is. Well, in the same way, these are the worshippers of the beast. They have the mark of the beast. The more important detail when it comes to decoding this symbolism is the consequences of not having the mark. Because John says one thing in particular about the consequences of not taking the mark of the beast, and that is you cannot buy or sell, which is a death sentence. Because if you can't buy the food you need and you can't sell anything to get money to buy food, you're not doing well. That is very bad news for you. If you can't buy or sell, that's very bad for you. Now, as for the fulfillment of that in the times of, say, Nero or Domitian, if you are marked as a Christian, or rather not marked as a worshiper of the emperor, you can't exactly just stroll down to the marketplace to buy the food you need. The moment people see you, they're going to say, hey, there's that Christian, and they're going to get you. And the next thing you know, you're a torch at Nero's garden party, or Domitian's garden party, if we're talking about Domitian as the revived Nero. You can't just go down to the marketplace and buy and sell. It's going to become extraordinarily difficult for you to get the things you need as a Christian. That's what I think it is. That's the mark of the beast. It's the consequences of not falling in line with what the rest of the world is doing, which is worshiping the Roman emperor. Speaking of which, number 2, let's talk about worshiping the beast. Now, technically, if you cross the T's and dot the I's of Roman religion, the emperor was never worshipped while he was alive. The emperor's genius was worshipped while he was alive. And then when the emperor died, he was officially elevated to the status of a god for worship. But while he was alive, you just worshiped the genius of the emperor. I have no idea what that means, but the Romans made a very firm distinction on that point most of the time. So whatever it means to them, it means something. You worship the genius of the emperor while he's alive, and then you worship him as a god after he's dead. But there were some emperors in Roman history who just couldn't wait. There were some emperors who wanted to have divine titles and honors while they were alive. And since they were the emperor, you can't exactly tell him no. And 2 of those emperors who wanted that, guess what? Nero and Domitian. Those were the two Roman emperors who wanted worship in some sense while they were alive. And then, to be honest, Caligula was also doing that, but that was before any of this. he was emperor number 3, so he's before all this stuff. But Nero and Domitian both demanded worship while alive. So they fit that. The idea of everyone worshiping the beast, that fits. Fits very well. And of course that means, you can probably figure this out, the second beast, the false prophet who comes along and causes the whole world to worship the beast, that's the emperor cult. There was an institutional religion of the Roman Empire whose job it was to make sure sacrifices were burned to the dead emperors and the genius of the living emperor, and also make sure that everyone else was doing those things as well. That's the emperor cult. So when you see that second beast showing up and kind of enforcing the law of worshiping the beast, it's the emperor cult, which you can imagine would be great enemies of Christianity, because Christians don't worship the emperor, neither his genius nor him, whatever distinction the Romans made by that. So the emperor cult is definitely the second beast. Well, finally, let's talk about the 10 kings. This is the one where we have the most speculation, but you know what? I think we can say something intelligent about it. So the mind with wisdom, we're going to figure it out, right? In various references to the beast, he is said to have 10 horns. 7 heads, 10 horns. In chapter 17, these horns are interpreted as 10 kings who share authority with the beast for an hour, which doubtless is time measurements or symbolic. But 10 kings who share authority with the beast at some point in some way. I think we can hazard a guess at identifying these horns, at identifying these kings, whoever they may be. Now, as most of you know, the Roman Empire was divided into provinces. These were, when Rome conquered a region, they considered that region a province of their empire. Now, there were 2 kinds of provinces in the Roman Empire. There were the imperial provinces, which were under the direct control of the emperor. These are usually the frontier areas. These are the areas that are more recently conquered. Maybe they're not quite as well assimilated into the Roman Empire as they would hope, so you need a heavier hand on those provinces to make sure they stay in line. So the emperor had direct control over those provinces, less bureaucracy, more action, keep these people in line. But then there were the senatorial provinces. These were the provinces that were directly under the administration of the Senate. These were provinces that had been part of the Roman Empire for a long time. These were the heartland, so to speak, of the Roman Empire. These were loyal, tame, docile provinces. So bring in all the bureaucracy you want, it'll work, because these people aren't going to be rebelling anytime soon. Now, would you like to guess how many senatorial provinces there were in the 1st century? 10. There were 10 senatorial provinces. So the heartland of the Roman Empire, the true core of the Roman Empire, was made up of 10 provinces under 10 governors. These were the most important governors in the Roman Empire. It's kind of like contrasting, sorry to offend anyone who might be watching this from these various states, but it's like comparing the state of California to the state of Idaho. Which one's more important? California's more important. So, like, these senatorial provinces are the most important provinces in the empire. These are the 10 kings who share authority with the emperor. You can't just sneeze at these guys. These guys have a huge position of power by virtue of being in charge of a senatorial province. I think those are probably the 10 kings. That is my best guess based on what I know, but I think it works. So, what do we say then in conclusion? Well, you may have forgot, all this talk about the 1st century may have distracted us from the main question of this series, which is on the last day of the last days. We're talking about end time stuff. Not 1st century stuff, we're talking about end time stuff. So the question we asked at the very beginning, is the beast a part of the end times? Is he an end times figure? No, the beast is not an end times figure at all. He doesn't belong in these things at all. The people who first read the book of Revelation would have probably said the beast seemed a lot like Nero, and the wisest among them would realize that John was trying to warn them about another emperor coming soon, who would be a lot like Nero and reinstitute persecution of Christians, try to be worshipped as a god, and all this terrible stuff. John's trying to warn them about that, something that is more imminent than just far, far into the future, beyond our day even. he was warning them about first century stuff. Okay, the fulfillment is first century. From all I have said today, this is a sound way to read the book of Revelation, and it therefore directs us away from futuristic interpretations and toward preteristic interpretations, directing us to more first century events more than anything. So with regard to all these heads, hills, and horns, I made 5 arguments. So first I argued that the beast was a Roman emperor. With the city on 7 hills, having worldwide dominion, sounds like a Roman emperor. Secondly, I showed you how the beast is portrayed very much like a particular emperor, Emperor Nero. So he persecuted Christians, he had a fatally wounded head, and then the final one, the number of his name, 666, which in Hebrew lettering would be the number of Nero's name. So there's those things. Secondly, I showed you, that was the second one. The third one is I talked about the Nero Redivivus myth, this idea that a lot of Romans had in the first century, that Nero was coming back, possibly coming back from the dead, to take power again. And it seems like John is using that in his beast imagery to flag a coming emperor as a revived Nero, as a new Nero. And that led us into the fourth point, which was that this later emperor who functions as a revived Nero is Emperor Domitian. So not actually Nero revived, but functioning in that role because he's so much like Nero, and he fits the succession of 7 kings, 8 kings really, that we talked about with regard to the first 8 Roman emperors. And then finally, I just made some comments on the mark of the beast, worshiping the beast, and then the 10 horns, which were the 10 kings. So, I have finally preached on the beast of the book of Revelation. I've wanted to do it for a long time, and I'm glad I was finally able to. So what's coming next in this series? Well, not much else. Next time, we're basically done with the substance. We're done with the substance of this series. It's been kind of chaotic. I feel like it's been not very well organized. Nonetheless, I've covered all the points that I really feel necessary for grounding you in a view of the end times and how to pick through things in the New Testament that aren't really about the end times, but people say they are. I've helped you, I think, make a division between those things to the point where you can really know what to expect from the last day of the last days. So all I have left to do is my next sermon is going to be an exhortation based on these things, because the point of all of these things is exhortation. And then after that, the Q&A sermon, so be sure to send your questions. Send your questions, and I will try to answer them as part of that last sermon. But that's all for today. Thank you very much for listening. Goodbye.